Hey everybody, this is DM Mike, and this is the next and last chapter tips video for Rise of Tiamat. This is going to cover chapter 7. This is Xonathals tower tips, so I'm going to talk about things outside the maze and the tower and the dungeon itself. So let's go ahead and get into this. I don't want to waste any time. First of all, before I kind of break this all down, here's an overall tip. Xonathals tower is a very tricky thing to run. It's very kind of tedious to set up, and it's a tricky chapter. It's a wacky chapter. I almost did not run this chapter. I know I've talked about this. So my biggest tip out of all these here is really to read it and reread that chapter, especially the first part, the things that happen in the maze, because this is one chapter where things can get really out of control very, very fast. All right, now, so let's get into the tips. The first tip, I added in some audio effects for you to use. It's not really a tip, it's just something you can use. It's on my SoundCloud or my Audio Mac. And what I did was there's 2 box texts inside the chapter that were really prime and perfect for doing a quick cutscene for, or a quick narrative piece. You can find them on my SoundCloud or my Audio Mac, and it kind of brings to life these 2 box texts. I think one of them is Iskander's message, and the other one is what Iskander says when he's up on the tower. And you'll come across those as you're prepping them. So if you want to bring a little audio into the mix, those are available. Number 2, Counsel. So first of all, they're going to meet at Waterdeep at some point, right? And they're going to have this council meeting, and they're going to tell them all this stuff. Here's one thing you want to have prepared. Go into the Forgotten Realms wiki and look for any kind of history and information about Xonathal's tower, and the region. Type them out, then cut them up, and hold them out for notes later during the campaign, because someone's going to eventually ask, well, what is Xonathal's tower, or who is Xonathal? And you have these notes that you can hand out to all your players, and then of course when they're doing their religion checks, their intelligence checks, their history checks, they have some unique information they can share at the table. So I encourage you to go into the wiki and look up everything you can about that region, the tower, and its maker, and so that you have stuff at the table, because I'm telling you, people are going to ask that question. Number 3, the dragon mask. Now look, the book does this several times. It does a bait and switch. It just gives it kind of hands out something to the players and takes it away, or entices them to go here and takes it away. By the time I got to this chapter, I felt like that was a little BS, and I was kind of getting tired of it. So for me, the tip I would give you, this is what I changed, is I let the dragon mask be the real dragon mask, because the chapter says it's a fake one. And I felt like after all they'd gone through and all this sacrifice, I wasn't about to do this bait and switch on them. So my advice is to give them the real blue dragon mask. And you can look on the wiki, you can look online, and you'll find all the stats. I think it's actually in the book too. I may be wrong about that. I remember having to go search for that actually. So you can find stats for the blue dragon mask. But look, my advice is don't make it a fake mask. That's kind of really, that's such a downer at the end of that chapter. Make it a real one. Okay, the maze itself. Prep only a few sections. All right, there's a lot there you can prep, and I picked like 3 or 4, I think 4 at the most, and I nixed 1 or 2 because I felt like it was just a little too much, right? So, pick and choose those areas to prep, or create your own, probably a better way to go, but maybe do half and half and stuff. But I didn't do all those little sections, so just pick the ones you want to do that are most interesting and run with those, and nix the rest. The next tip is drop the hints. Let me tell you, the maze can be confusing. I'm not talking about just going through the maze. Mazes are confusing in general. I mean just the hints. It's a very esoteric puzzle they have to solve. And first of all, it's very easy for you to screw it up as a DM. That's why I encourage you to read and reread it, and then read it again right before you run it, to make sure you're not screwing it up. But sometimes, like I've said in my campaign diaries, puzzle elements can be very confusing, or there's not enough information. Make sure you're ready to drop hints about how to solve this puzzle. Otherwise, you're going to fall into a trap where the players are going to be exhausted, like literally just tired of this crap and trying to figure out this maze. They're going to get lost over and over and over again and have endless encounters until they finally figure it out. And again, it's not about insulting one's intelligence like they couldn't figure it, but you got to think about this, how you can drop hints. I talk about this in my campaign diaries. I'm not going to cover them here into great detail, but I had to put vibrations and different things they were feeling at the pedestal, or this kind of magnetic pulling into the hedges. And if you're prepping it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It can just get very, very confusing, and they might figure it out the first time, the second time, but then suddenly it just spirals out of control. So be prepared to drop hints. Next one is the Cyclops. There's an encounter where the characters can go into Cyclops. If you watch my campaign diary, there was a little bit of fiasco there. You might have a party that can't do anything with this rock because the Cyclopses don't attack. They just challenge them to pick up this huge rock that weighs like a ton and throw it 120 feet. And the characters can do all kinds of things, but if they've burnt their spells from other encounters, they're exhausted, and other things have happened, it can quickly turn into a little bit of like a conundrum. Like, okay, how do we solve this? So just be careful with that. Let that be the first encounter or the second encounter. Don't put that Cyclops encounter too far to the end. I would probably encourage you to make sure players are rested or what before they hit Xonathals Tower, because I did hit a conundrum. It was kind of probably a rare thing, but it did create a problem that in the moment I had to figure out how to fix it. And I think my solution is not going to help you because your players are different, and I don't know what classes they're playing. You can watch the campaign diary on that, but just get ready to solve that little rock puzzle more than just one way. Next is the teleporter. Once they've gotten to the maze, they've done all those encounters, you've dropped your hints, they're going to get to the teleporter, and this is the part where they're going to be teleporting all over the place, all over the tower. Now, I ran this in Tabletop Simulator, and the easiest thing I did was I typed directly onto the map and told them, this is the symbol. I didn't define the symbols like as to where they lead, because that's something they had to figure out, right? But I at least typed out there what those symbols were on each level, so I didn't have to keep repeating that. If you don't have any digital virtual tabletops, obviously you could probably just type something out, print one sheet, put it on the table, say, hey, okay, here's the symbols in front of you, and you can write down where you think they're leading them. These symbols are leading you to, right? That's one way of handling it. But just be, if you don't put something on the table, you're going to have people constantly asking you, okay, what was on the plaque? Was there a triangle? Was there a chair? Wait, wasn't there a couch? It's just going to go on and on. So make a handout or put it directly into the virtual tabletop just to, prevent all those hassles. Another tip here is be prepared for large encounters. Look, you can go back to my campaign diary on Xonathals Tower, and within 10 minutes of being in the tower, my players managed to rouse the entire area, right? Not the dungeon itself, but the entire tower. And there's a lot of enemies in the tower. And of course, when the whole tower is alerted, all of those cultists start making their way to wherever the ruckus is, right? And that's exactly what happened to me. So be prepared for things to go down the crapper very, very quickly, especially if you have a thief or someone who's very inquisitive in the group and very curious and wants to touch and do things and go all over the place, because it could happen. One of the things I had to do was completely build out an entire new room, one of the rooms that was directly on the map, but I had to rebuild it to make it bigger because all the cultists had descended on this room and all the players were in this room, and this huge incredible battle happened in this one tiny little space, and it would have been too complicated on this huge map trying to work that out. I think even for tokens and whatnot, you're probably going to have a problem in those little tiny maps that this adventure provides you with, trying to put everybody and all the cultists in this one little location. It's not going to work. So have a battle mat ready, draw it out in advance. Virtual tabletop, have another room ready. Of course, this kind of depends on what room you end up in. I think we ended up in the observatory, but you want to have something on standby where it's at least mapped out a little bit. Just don't worry about furniture and all that stuff. Just a little, okay, here's a layout, because it can go down really quick and get really nasty. So those are the towers and the maze, those tips I can give you. Now the dungeon itself. Wacky reactions. All right, this is the next tip. Wacky reactions. Just be prepared for that. People are going to stop, especially when they get to the hallway and the maze. There's going to be some weird responses from players. This is one chapter, like I said in my campaign diary, where I almost didn't run this chapter because I felt like it was just too over the top. It felt like this chapter belonged in another book. It didn't quite make sense to be in Rise of Tiamat. It's both lethal and comedic all at the same time. It's just kind of a wacky thing. I'm glad I ran it. But just be prepared, because you're going to have a lot of players stopping and going, what? What is happening? Why is there a hallway with a galaxy in it? Right? So just be prepared. Read up on those rooms and some of those bizarre magical effects to make sure you got them down, because, man, you're going to get a lot of questions. All right, the next tip is low health. Just something I'm going to put out there. You might want to have a cultist have a potion of healing or two, depending on your party makeup and how well they play. Because if they get into a huge encounter in the tower going against every single cultist, by the time they get to the dungeon where there are, air elementals, other elementals, and different things, they're going to be pretty beat up and pretty exhausted. So you just want to make sure not to sugarcoat it and make it super easy, but you might want to at least prepare. I'd hate for your adventurers to die in such a wacky little place, because of oversight. I mean, I don't know. I would just encourage maybe one or two cultists have a health potion, perhaps, because if things do go south in the tower, it's gonna get ugly quick, and you may have no players by the end of this adventure. Next tip is the balancing act in the dungeon. The only thing I really removed here, I kept the air elementals and all that kind of stuff, all the wacky things that were going on in these rooms. But the one thing I did take out was, let me check my sheet here, Taraz the Fair. He's like in the back right-hand corner of the dungeon. I don't know. I just felt like after all they went through, and they just wanted to get to Iskander. They just wanted to get this blue dragon mask and figure out where he was. By that time, the dragon was on the way, so there was like this time crunch. I felt like that last encounter at the very end of the dungeon was kind of silly and a waste of time. It was time to get to the main event, which was getting that dragon, getting the blue mask and fighting the dragon, most likely outside Xonathals town. So anyway, I would recommend you nix that portion, unless you want it. I mean, obviously you go ahead, but I would recommend you kind of go, I think it's called Taraz the Fair. I think he's in area 28 or something. I can't remember now the numbers. But just look in your book. But I would recommend just getting rid of it because, man, it's just too much. And finally, the dragon fight. What did I put here? This could be a little bit tricky because you may not have a map for this. Where's the dragon encounter going to take place? Right, in the maze, right outside the maze. Most likely, it's going to take place in the town. So you're going to want to have some kind of open area to have this combat. I got lucky and just used a generic town map on Tabletop Simulator. I wasn't really too thrilled with the map either, but I mean, I just didn't have time to build out a town for this to happen. And plus, you're going to have people running all over the place, so you need some space. But be prepared for that big encounter. If it's just a big battle map, then put it out. But be prepared that this is going to take place in a pretty crowded area, most likely in the town. So just, put some buildings up and just be ready for all kinds of mayhem as dragons coming through, crushing things, and people are running all over the place. It could be a bit tricky, because obviously the adventure really didn't come with a lot of maps, and a lot of maps that were there were, in my opinion, somewhat useless. All right, guys, that's it. That's all my tips I have for you. We'll do a quick recap so you have it all here. I'm not going to break them down as much as I used to, but I'm just going to give you a quick recap. I'm going to make up titles on the spot. I don't know if any of this sounds good. But first of all, the first tip was audio. If you want to use some of my Iskander messages or my narrative box text, go ahead and use them. They're my Audio Mac and my SoundCloud. You'll find the links in the description below. Counsel notes. Make sure to have plenty of history notes about Xonathal and Xonathals Tower. The next is the blue dragon mask. Make it real. Don't fake it. Make it real, right? I mean, it's just they go through so much to get it. Why take that away from them? The next up is let's see what is this? Oh, prep. Prepping the maze. Just pick the encounters you want, and that's it. As a matter of fact, I would recommend nixing one or two of them, or at least coming up with one or two on your own, because they get a little convoluted and then go on and on and on, right? So just be careful about that. Next one is dropping hints. Look, you got to reread it and read it again and figure out how you're going to drop a hint in these moments when they can't figure out the pedestal or they can't figure out the maze, all right, or the hedge mazes, because it can go south pretty quickly. Next up is the Cyclops. Again, it's a puzzle element that could be confusing and somewhat convoluted with him trying to move this 1-ton stone, like 600 pounds or something like that. I can't remember. I think it's actually a ton, but or less than a ton. But, just get ready for that. It seems like a fun encounter, but it can get complicated pretty quick. Next up is the teleporter. I recommend typing out a sheet maybe and having, all the teleporter symbols, and just so people don't have to keep asking you, hey, what's the orange? Is there an orange on there? Is there a grapefruit? I mean, just put the symbols down there. Virtual tabletop, you could probably put it directly on there, some kind of image, piece of cake. Next up is large encounters. Be ready for the tower to all be alerted and having a very big combat round and scenario in at least one of those rooms. And finally, into the dungeon, we got wacky reactions. That's the next tip. Wacky reactions. Just be prepared to explain all this. I mean, or at least do the best you can, and be prepared just for the guffaw moments from all your players, because it just gets a little wacky in there, and people are just left kind of scratching their heads. Next up, low health. Just a recommendation. Might want to have a cultist, one or two, at least have a health potion on them, because by the time they get to the dungeon, it's pretty messy. Next is a final balance. I removed Taraz the Fair back in the right-hand dungeon. I felt like at that point it was just too much. But that's up to you if you want to keep it in there. Maybe change his attitude from evil to maybe good, like he was actually a real prisoner. But I don't know, by that point, and they got a dragon coming, I don't know, just too much. And finally, the dragon fight. That's the last tip I got for you. Just have something ready to go. You're going to want a town map or a street map or a small city map of some kind, or maybe just an open area. I mean, I guess you can do whatever you want. But just be ready for another big encounter there. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I got for you. Those are the chapter tips for Xonathals Tower, Chapter 7. Now, that is the last tips I have for Rise of Tiamat. I have nothing more for any of the chapters. I never got to the Cult Strikes Back because I was waiting to ambush my players, but there was never a good time. I mean, the cult could have done it maybe 1 or 2 times, but it would have been a fruitless effort. They were way too strong and way too out in the open, so none of it would have worked. The mission to Thay, I was going to run completely differently. I wasn't going to go to Thay and have all this kind of stuff happen. I was going to do something very local that may have taken 30 minutes to do, so I'm not going to do that. You know, as I said, my campaign diary lost 2 players at the very end, 1 chapter away from the end of this book. So I will not be doing the Metallic Dragon's Rise chapter, even though I had a few things set up. It's not worth exploring now. So, and obviously I will not have chapter tips for the very final chapter. I wish I did, but I don't anymore. So that is it for Rise of Tiamat. I'm going to do a post-mortem after this, hopefully give some more advice and for people who are picking this up for the first time and what to expect. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with it. I'll see you in the next one.